Welcome to the channel. Today, I'm going to recap an exciting movie called Flight World War II. Story revolves around an airline plane that unexpectedly finds itself in the midst of World War II, though current year is 2015. Imagine this, the plane was flying high up in the sky, peacefully soaring through the clouds. But then, out of nowhere, a dark and dense cloud suddenly appeared right in front of it. Curiously, the plane ventured into the cloud, and what they witnessed inside left everyone amazed and stunned. They found themselves surrounded by fighter planes, causing chaos on the ground, dropping bombs and causing destruction, just like in World War II. Can you believe it? And to add to their surprise, their plane came under attack from those fighter planes. The story begins with a conversation between the pilot and co-pilot inside the plane. They were chatting about their plans to reach their destination within an hour. But then, they get to know, the plane's navigation system had malfunctioned. They immediately contacted the control room and informed them about the situation. They were worried because this malfunction affected all the related instruments too. However, when the controller assured them that everything seemed to be working fine, they decided to double-check with the air traffic ahead. To their relief, they discovered that the weather was actually perfectly fine, contrary to what they initially thought. But guess what? Just when they thought things might be okay, they spotted a massive storm looming ahead. This sudden revelation frightened both the pilots for a moment. They felt unsure about what to do next. They attempted to contact the control room once again, but unfortunately, they couldn't establish any communication. As the plane got closer to the storm, their anxiety grew. Maneuvering through the storm seemed like their only option, but it was a risky situation. They made sure to inform all the passengers about what was happening. Finally, the plane reached the storm's vicinity, and in no time, they were engulfed in its furious winds and turbulence. This intense experience scared the passengers, and panic started to spread. Even the pilot and co-pilot felt the fear within themselves. But, despite their fear, they summoned up their courage and tried their best to navigate the plane through the storm, hoping to safely reach the other side. After some time, pilots realized that everything ahead appeared normal. The plane had also ceased shaking, but the most peculiar thing was that it had transformed into nighttime, despite it being daytime just before entering the storm. Darkness enveloped them from all directions. Furthermore, all the devices on the plane had ceased functioning. They attempted to establish contact with the control room, but their efforts proved futile. However, their radar was still operational, albeit limited to detecting signals in close proximity. As they traveled a few miles further, their radar detected the presence of fighter planes. The situation left them bewildered, as they had no understanding of what was happening. They made another attempt to establish contact with the control room, but their attempts were unsuccessful. The co-pilot, upon spotting the fighter planes, informed his superior that the aircraft surrounding them are not passenger planes, but rather fighter planes. The sight below became horrifying when the plane descended slightly beneath the clouds. The fighter planes were relentlessly bombing the city beneath, causing widespread destruction. Buildings were being demolished, and the scene resembled a full-fledged war. Some passengers caught glimpses of the devastation, and fear gripped their hearts. Staff was trying to control the panic situation in passengers. The pilots themselves were overwhelmed with anxiety. They couldn't comprehend the situation unfolding before them. How could it be? They had taken off during daylight, and now, suddenly, darkness had descended. The pilot recognized the urgency of landing as soon as possible, realizing that the plane's fuel would soon deplete. Even the passengers were anxiously observing the scene below, yearning to uncover the truth. The staff continued their best efforts to calm everyone, but in such a chaotic situation, finding peace seemed impossible. Meanwhile, two passengers on the plane noticed what was happening outside. They were historians who had seen the fighter plane that flew past them a minute ago. When they saw the fighter plane, they remembered details from their books and started to understand what was going on. They wanted to talk to the pilot about the situation, but the staff stopped them from reaching the cockpit. After convincing the staff, they finally got to talk to the pilot. They told the senior pilot that the fighter planes they saw were not manufactured after 1945. All the planes produced during the Second World War were inoperative after World War ended. The captain was curious and asked the historians what they were trying to prove here. The historians tried to explain that they had traveled back in time, maybe to the year 1940 during the Second World War. But the pilot found it difficult to believe in time travel. Still, he felt the need to provide some evidence to prove that they had really traveled to 1940. However, they didn't want this information to reach the passengers, so the historians went back to their seats. But the captain couldn't stop thinking about what they said. Could it be true that they had experienced time travel? For now, the plane continued its journey, and then they received a radio message from an army officer stationed to his base. The army officer wanted to get information about the captain because they suspected the plane might be an enemy aircraft. The captain tried to explain the situation and asked for help from the army officer. The officer was completely confused and didn't know whether to offer assistance or not because they didn't know much about this airplane. The captain remembered what the historians had said and decided to ask for the current date. When the army officer informed him that it was June 17, 1940, the captain was astonished. This was the same answer he had received every time he asked. Both pilots were now convinced that they had truly traveled through time. They had journeyed from 2015 to 1940, a staggering 75 years into the past. Eager to learn more, the captain called upon the historians again, as they possessed extensive knowledge of historical events. Once again, they contacted the army officer and shared details about a significant incident, the imminent sinking of a major ship in 1940. The army officers were taken aback by this revelation and promptly reported the information to their senior officers. In the meantime, the historians explained that there had been unusual weather disturbances and other unexplained phenomena that had transported them to the year 1940, coinciding with the ongoing Second World War. Their lives were now in jeopardy. Being aware that they did not belong in this time period, the historians advised everyone to remain patient, as there was a possibility of returning to 2015. However, the presence of fighter planes in the skies made their situation complicated. They had to be cautious, as any mistaken identity could lead to an attack. Ensuring their own safety became paramount if they wanted to return to their own time. It was crucial to keep the passengers unaware of their situation. Unfortunately, a passenger overheard their conversation and became deeply alarmed. He hurriedly shared all the information with the other passengers, but most of them dismissed his claims and laughed at him. Nevertheless, a few passengers paid attention and accepted the seriousness of the situation. After some time, army officer contacts the pilot and says, "The information you provided about the sinking ship was accurate. Thanks to you, many lives were saved. I am now ready to assist you. First, tell me your location." However, the Baldy had no idea about their location. All their instruments were malfunctioning, making it impossible to determine their precise location. They came up with an idea to turn on all the external lights of the plane. After turning on the lights, their plane became visible from a distance. But they were not close to the army officer. While things were not going well with the officer, a worse situation was approaching. The numerous fighter planes flying in the sky noticed them. All the surrounding fighter planes started approaching their airplane. They suspected it to be a highly advanced enemy superplane. The fighters began firing at their plane. However, the captain knew how to evade these fighters because their technology was outdated. The fighters from this time couldn't match the maneuverability of their plane, so the pilot quickly directed the plane downward. This sudden maneuver put the fighters off guard. The firing continued relentlessly. The plane descended further, and at this point, both the pilot and co-pilot abruptly maneuvered the plane upward. Despite the fighter plane's inability to make such quick movements, they attempted to chase after them. The firing persisted, but as the fighters tried to act heroically, some of them collided with each other and exploded upon hitting the ground. However, the pilots' problems were far from over as their plane was running out of fuel. Just then, they faced another threat as two more fighter planes attacked them. The intensity of the attack caused several windows of the plane to shatter. The broken windows, coupled with strong gusts of wind, disrupted the plane's balance. The two historians on board believed that if they wanted assistance from the army, they would need to use their radar technology and parachute it down to reach them, so that they could know the plane's location. This required a large bag, which they obtained by asking the passengers. Surprisingly, an elderly man confidently handed them all the necessary items, as if he already knew what they would need. They packed the radar equipment and other stuff, and then deployed them with a parachute. However, it landed in front of the enemy soldiers, not the army officer. It turned out that while the captain was communicating with the army officer via radio, the enemy soldiers were listening to their conversation. The Army officer swiftly took action, eliminating the enemy soldiers, recovering the radar and other items, and installing them properly. With the radar's assistance, the Army officer determined the plane's location. The Army officer continued to provide real-time information to the pilots, aiding them in safely guiding the plane through treacherous skies. They encountered numerous challenges along the way, and the situation became so dire that it seemed the plane might crash mid-air. Despite sustaining damage from various sources, the plane miraculously kept flying. The Army officers devised a plan to safely land the plane at a suitable location. However, just as they were about to execute the plan, a sudden storm materialized, reminiscent of the one they had encountered previously. They realized that in order to return to their own time, they had to confront and overcome the storm. Both pilots made the bold decision to face the storm head-on. Steering the plane directly towards the storm, it began to shake violently, just as it had before. After some time, when the plane emerged from the storm, they found themselves back in their own time, in the year 2015. However, at this point, the plane had completely depleted its fuel reserves. It was on the brink of crashing, but fortunately, they discovered a runway where the captain skillfully executed a landing. Despite the plane's severe damage, everyone on board emerged unharmed. Gradually, all the passengers disembarked from the airplane. In the final moments, there remained an elderly man engrossed in writing in his diary. Remarkably, he was the same individual who had provided the large bag and other essential items to facilitate the lowering of the radar. Surprisingly, this elderly man was, in fact, the Army officer who had played a crucial role in returning the plane to its original time. He had possessed prior knowledge that in 2015, this specific aircraft would undertake a journey back to 1940. That is precisely why he had boarded the plane and brought along all the necessary tools that could prove valuable to their mission. The movie concludes at this point, without offering an explanation how the Army officer acquired knowledge of the time travel. If you enjoyed this explanation, please consider subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell.